Let me tell a tale of a world where heroes walk among us, fighting through the darkness left by monsters and by selfish men. A tale of glory rents asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. Let me sing a song of a family forged by trials and woe. On their own they falter, but together they will write their own tale of glory, rent asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. What was rent shall be restored. What was lost now shall be found. The price of valor ever rising, but victory brings new rewards. Tales of glory, might, and wonder, hard-fought battles, treasures won. Our heroes know their fate awaits them, and so they carry on.
Hello, what's up, everybody? Welcome. My name is Pixel, and we are here with Ages of Idor presents another world building stream. So we are today going to be talking about an exciting topic, I hope, and one that I feel like I'm a little bit of a specialist in to some extent, which is how to world build in a world you didn't build.
Ta-da!
Yeah, which is kind of a pithy way to say how to take already existing like settings, adventures, and I'm mostly gonna be talking in the context of just published adventures, but how to take existing content in a TTRPG that you're gonna be running as a GM and like just change stuff in it, right? How, like, what does that process look like? What are the skills you need? As you guys know, we have excuse me, I'm dying. Oh god, this is how it ends. As you guys know, we do post these on YouTube after the fact. And we are trying to do, we sort of missed the ball on April by like one day, I'm realizing, but fuck
24
it,
hours.
It's fine. Okay, so this is technically the April episode of our world building streams, even though it's actually
Still counts.
it's already May. Anyway, so yeah, let's jump into it. We are going to be talking about how to world build in a world you didn't build.
And like Cookie said, like Pixel said, this is his like wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I have watched him do this for years. He's very good at it. So we're gonna try to dig at him a little bit to see if he'll reveal some of his trade secrets with us tonight.
So, the first thing that I feel like I'm so washed out when I'm looking at the doc. There's like different levels to this thing. There's different levels to this thing, right? So, there's the way that I tend to approach this when I'm running games is looking like, or at least the way I got into doing this. Let's put it that way. The way I got into doing this was starting to run pre-published adventures for streams, and wanting to make sure that I had like, so that it didn't feel like my players were like cameras with legs that wandered around while the story happened around them. You know, that they were like tied into the world and involved, right?
The Kojima effect, yes.
Yeah. And so what I wanted to do was to make sure that they felt connected to this world. And so what I found was helpful was like when you have players that are making, you know, what to me are good characters, right? A lot of times they will leave what I think of as these little like dangling bits, almost like a jigsaw puzzle that is like, it's like if you cut a jigsaw puzzle piece out of wood, right? And then the adventure is a box of other jigsaw puzzle pieces that mostly fit together, but then I can find the other parts of a jigsaw that their extra piece of a character can slot into. So oftentimes this will be like stuff in their backstory, like the person who murdered my parents, or like my child who was stolen by wolves, or whatever like wacky fantasy
The
thing.
wizard that cursed my wife.
The wizard that cursed my wife, or just the wizard that was my mentor, or this faction
Or my
that I
wife who
joined
was
that
the
I'm on
wizard
outs
that
with.
cursed my
It's
wife.
literally anything that your players put in the backstory that like it's also, you can think about it like Velcro, like it's a little hook that's sticking off their character in some direction. And what I try to do, and how I kind of got into doing this world building in a world I didn't build, was to look at the adventures I was running and like see if there was anything in the adventure that could, you know, easily hook onto that hook, right? For instance, I had a character who wanted to play a Swarmkeeper Ranger in the last edition of Waterdeep Dragon Heist that we ran. And the game gave me a guy who sells honey who's been abducted. And I was like, oh, great. Like, this guy is, you know, and so it's like you just kind of, you did, you know. Or I had two separate characters make changeling characters for different reasons. And the game gave me a character in the bar everyone hangs out at that is a doppelganger. And it was like, all right, so, you know, there's a shapeshifter club over here. And so it started out with stuff like that, of just taking, and different adventures give you different amounts of stuff to use, right? And it can be easier and harder depending on the scope of the adventure and the setting that you're in and things like that. So that's like the easiest way to start to do this, is to like, again, and not just doing it because it was stuff I wanted to do, like, ooh, this will be fun, we'll throw this in there. It was really reacting to like what my players were giving me, right? Who is it? Brennan Lee Mulligan talks about this with Fantasy High Season 1, where he was like, well, one of my characters made a little goblin private investigator. So as a GM, I would be a huge dick if I didn't give him a mystery to solve. Right? And it's like, duh, yeah, of course. Like, you know. And in a way, you can kind of think about it like trying to make sure, and like, you know, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, that you can't land every plane, but trying to make sure that like the characters that your players make fit in the like story that's happening, right? Which can be hard because you got a lot of different characters going on.
So it sounds like what you do is you take the material. Let's say it's a published adventure like Waterdeep, and you're when you're starting a campaign, really what you're looking for is taking those PCs that were given to you, their backstories, their vibe, their class, and everything else. You're just sort of rolling them around in the adventure and seeing what pulls up onto their character.
Yeah, and my hope is that I can find at least one thing with every character that I can hook on to something in the adventure, right? And I do this for a number of reasons. Again, one is to make them feel connected to the world, right? Oftentimes they're handing me NPCs to use, or they're handing me like the outline of an NPC that I can slot one of the people in the adventure to. For instance, in Curse of Strahd, Onyx's player, Sam, gave me a gnome wizard whose mentor was missing, and the adventure gave me this wizard running around Barovia in the woods, living and eating squirrels, and, you know, because he tried to fight Strahd and lost. And so I was like, oh, you know, and so it's that kind of thing. I'm trying to find like at least one thing with every character that, because like it ties them into the world, and it gives them a moment when, like, especially in a longer campaign that's going to take, you know, a few episodes, there's moments that it gets to be about them and their relationship to whatever this thing is that's happening, right? And so I try as best I can to do that with all the characters, right? And so that's like one of the first things is, you know, just simply taking what's already there and trying to find ways to hook it with what they gave you, right? That's kind of like level one, I feel like.
So let me ask you, if you try to preserve the things in the adventure, or mildly adapt them for the things that really stick to the PCs, to the players, what do you do with the stuff left over after that in the published adventure?
It depends, kind of, on the adventure itself and like what the genre and the vibe of everything is. Sometimes, like as I was saying, like level one is just taking what's already there and like hooking it to things. Level two, and this can go to both stuff that like you've hooked to something but that maybe doesn't quite fit right, or to like the broader some things in the adventure that maybe you want to monkey with for other reasons, is like the idea of like reskinning and adapting things that are already there, right?
Yeah.
And I think again this concept of the shape of a puzzle piece, that like that metaphor can kind of carry over here, right? So for instance, I'm running Lost Mine of Fandelver, right?
Great starting campaign.
Yeah, great starting campaign. Although I've heard that some of the newer ones are actually even better, so I'll be interested to maybe try one of those one time. But I've run it before. I had some new players, wanted to run it again. But you know, given that it's been now 10 or 11 years since that thing came out, some of the like bioessentialism in fantasy role-playing game discourse has really developed since then in a way that like things that we weren't exactly thinking about goblins and orcs and drow elves and shit in 2014, that some people were thinking about them, but the broader community wasn't really on that page yet, has sort of mainstreamed, right? And so now that I'm running this again, I was kind of like, I really want to see if I can't run a version of this campaign where I just throw all that crap out the window. So what I needed to do was kind of re-aestheticize some of the parts of that adventure, right?
Palette swap, kind
palette
of.
swap,
Well,
right?
deeper than that.
I needed something that was the same shape, basically, that fulfilled the same function within the little jigsaw puzzle of the adventure, but maybe like the stuff that was drawn on that particular jigsaw
So
piece.
you're painting over the jigsaw
Yes,
piece
I'm
and then
painting
putting
over the
it
jigsaw
back.
piece. And it's like, it turns out it's not that hard to do, right? They give you,
Right.
oh, this is a tribe of goblins, and it's like, just, they can be bandits. Why do they have to be, like, it doesn't, you know.
Okay.
And it was honestly really quite easy to do, right? To just take what the adventure gave me and just be like, well, we're going to shave that off and we're going to slap a different paint of coat on it, a coat of paint on it, coat of paint on it, Jesus. So we're kind of taking the good stuff of like the bones of the adventure, and then we're leaving out the bad stuff and or painting over, you know, the bad stuff. And that's easier said than done in some adventures. It was very easy with the goblin situation in Lost Mine of Fandelver, partially because the aesthetics of the goblins wasn't that important in the overall adventure course, but it was harder when I ran Curse of Strahd with the Vistani, because the aesthetics of the Vistani being this like Romani traveler
Being like a direct
stereotype.
reference to a
Yeah,
world, a real world stereotype.
exactly, and that was kind of core to the function they were playing in the world. So it was like, you know, I tried to like search for resources people had put out that would help with sensitivity on that issue, but it was honestly quite difficult. As much as that's a really good adventure, it was quite difficult to really satisfyingly, because it's like if you fully scrape all that coat of paint off of there, as
Which
it
is
were,
real history,
Yeah,
some of
right.
it, you know.
if you scrape that whole coat of paint off there, I can't talk tonight for some reason.
Coat of paint.
Coat of paint off of there, you can't. It's really hard to fulfill the same function without it. But at the same time, like leaving it unchanged has this huge sensitivity issue, you know. So it can be trickier and harder depending on like what shape the thing is filling in the adventure. But yeah.
So that's kind of your approach to starting a campaign or to
I've
take.
infected you. You can't talk either.
I know, right? Curses.
Starting a campaign. Sorry.
So you have a group of players.
Yeah.
They're all eager to play something. They're probably not beginners, or if they are, they've had a lot of time to think about different characters and their backstories, and they have material and references that they can provide to you. So you're already starting with kind of a lot, right?
Yeah.
Um, if I'm a new uh, GM and I have my friends and they're not really sure, they've never really done a TTRPG before. Maybe I did one with like my older cousin, and now I want to try running a game,
Yeah.
right? Um, how do you think someone like that should start? Like what kind of how are they going to find the material to cannibalize or adapt?
Hmm.
Um, what kind of inspirations would you tell them to lean on?
Oh, okay. Um, that's kind of just whatever other media you're consuming, right? I mean, books, movies, um,
Because like, where do you
games.
find this stuff or the ideas to replace the things in an adventure
Mhm.
that you don't like? I guess is
Gotcha.
what I'm
Yeah,
trying to get at.
that's funny. I've never had to try to do that, so I've never had to think about it all that
Hmm.
hard.
Well,
So a lot of it I'm pulling
yeah.
from just like my ideology, philosophy, worldview about things, right? Which to me is like questions about like power and political economy and human nature and religion and all sorts of stuff, right? Um, that I, actually think about the real world and then try to like take scenarios and craft stuff out of that. But it's also, media that I've consumed and games that I've played and books that I've read and movies that I've seen and all that kind of stuff. Um, One of the things that's like in all of this is that the fundamental tools of storytelling are something that's like really, really key to all of this, but that the TTRPG hobby, by and large, kind of doesn't always set you up with a ton of success for, right? Like you basically
Right.
in no D&D adventure or like DMing book put out by Wizards of the Coast, and this is not necessarily true of every TTRPG, but it is true of like I'm gonna say all the ones I've read, and I'm only adding that as a caveat because I think
85%.
there's a few out there that don't do this. But very rarely are they gonna tell you like you should openly discuss with your characters what they want their arc to be. But I'll tell you as a GM, I do that in every campaign that I run, and it's really important for me to be able to do all of this other stuff, right? That I just openly talk to the players. They've gotten their character, they've gotten their backstory, and like one of the last things I ask them in like I do like a session 0, and then for a stream game especially, I try to do like a one-on-one session with each character to try to like make sure we're on the same page, discuss any secret stuff they might have, yada yada yada. Is to just straight up ask them like, what do you want your character's arc to be? Like, what do and knowing, and I'll caveat like it may not land the way we intend, it may change as we go, but like if you're looking at a story for this character, like what does that kind of look like, right?
Mm.
Um, and then often when I'm adding the stuff into the world building, it is to support that kind of thing that the character's already given me. Sometimes it's just for other dastardly
You're
reasons.
doing layups for them so that they can
Yes.
get a slam dunk. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm trying to set them up to be able to do the kind of thing they want to do with the character. Again, with the knowledge that this is improvisational. Sometimes you plant seeds that we don't get to see grow. Sometimes you set up promises that never pay off. Sometimes you could change partway through based on what happens or based on the player just deciding they want to do something different. All of those caveats in place as well. But um, so but that I think is really important, that like not just the tools that the tabletop thing gives you, but understanding storytelling and character arc, motivation, promise, progress, and payoff is another one I use all the time. So like these kinds of things
Yep.
help me know what I need to tweak in the adventure to make the characters pop more, because it's kind of like, you know, it's like the illusion that these characters aren't the main characters of the world, but they are the main characters of the world. So like if you lay it on too
Right.
thick, it feels like everything. It's what's the pathetic fallacy? I don't know if you are aware. It's like where in a piece of media, everything in the world orients itself a little too obviously towards the mental state, goals, whatever
Mm,
of the main character. It's sort of like a thing in romantic writing where like someone was sad and it starts raining immediately. Or it's like,
right.
anyway, so you don't want to go too far with that, but at the same time, like the characters need to pop and they need to have their opportunity to do the cool stuff they want to do, and so that's part of what I do when I'm monkeying with these things is to take the raw material that I'm given and set it up as a platform for these character stories to happen.
Now, I think we may have talked about promise, progress, payoff in maybe the first or second episode of world building.
Okay. All right.
Um, but maybe,
Sorry. So, could you start that again?
yeah. So I think we've mentioned promise, progress, payoff
Yeah.
before on the stream. Uh, but maybe it's helpful for you to summarize that because it sounds
Sure.
like the way that you are approaching building your campaigns is about setting that up for your players inside the material.
Yeah, right. It's like the way I look at it, there's kind of the overarching plot of what's happening in the campaign. And I want that to be as good as I can make it. But like that's the thing that in a lot of cases is the hardest to really monkey with.
Mm,
Because it's like, all of the parts of it are theoretically, if it's a good campaign, written to fit together and logically flow from one another. So you can like do paint changes and stuff easy on that. And sometimes you can monkey with it a little bit, like huge reworks. It's like, why not start from scratch, right? So I'm trying to like not get into the situation where I'm like massively reworking huge parts of like how the thing fits together, right? Um, but so I think of it as like that stuff is not static, but it's like I don't know how to put this. It's like the difference between like Jello and clay. Like the shit that's like majorly important to the plot structure of the campaign is more like clay in that you can shape it, but it's not as wiggly as Jello. Right, and that
okay.
the other thing that's happening is like the players, the characters, individual arcs, I want to tie them into the main stuff that's happening as often as I can, but often it's this like thing that's happening in the background or a more limited, it's like this second layer of the storytelling. And what I find is that like the stuff happening with the main plot is almost the excuse for all of the cool character development stuff to happen in this other like level of the storytelling in a way. And again, I try to tie it back in as often as possible where if somebody hands me something that's like, oh, that ties in really well to the villain, great. We snap it right in there and now this whole bit of the main plot feels great. But I'm not like, I have this thing and there's this whole faction, but this person gave me a singular villain, so I'm going to rework this whole faction so that now they have one singular villain in charge of it. I'm less likely to do that second thing. It's not impossible, but like, you know what I mean? Versus having this villain pop up as a complication that they have to deal with at a certain point, or just be operating for their own agenda throughout the course of the adventure. You know what I mean? It's like that's the Jello to me in a way.
So it almost sounds like you should add a fourth P, personalize.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so the promise progress payoff thing is specifically about like character arc. Essentially,
right.
it's the way
The
like a
the
promise,
mechanics of storytelling,
mechanics of
right?
storytelling. And what so the promise is the little hints you drop early on about what's going to be important, right?
Mm,
So for instance, there's the um Mel's arc in the first time I ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist, where in her vignette at the beginning, she like looks wistfully at this group of children, right? That's the promise that there's something going on with Mel and children, and it turns out, spoiler alert if you haven't
he
watched that.
completely missed it.
Spoiler alert if you haven't watched that. And then there were also, so that's the problem, right? So the progress on that was she often did and said kind of childish things. All of her spells had this like childish theme to them. It turns out, boop, 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 the payoff is Mel is a changeling and was
It
originally
was a
little
huge
boy,
payoff.
right? And so that's the promise, progress, payoff. Promise is like the thing that you hook your audience with where you're like, hey, this is kind of going to be a story about this thing, but you don't know all the details, right? And then the progress is like the breadcrumbs that you lay as you go to, to show them
The
you're getting
payoff.
closer to finding out what's going on with this. And then the payoff is the moment where everything that you set up executes and lands, right? And that, I will say, in an improvisational group storytelling apparatus like a tabletop role-playing game where stuff
Tough.
is dice-driven, landing those is hard. Okay? So I also tell players, like, we will plant seeds that will not flower. We will make promises that will not pay off. And everybody needs to be okay with that. Like, I do my best to get everything for everybody in if I can, but there's sometimes you kind of just can't land them all. Sometimes someone gives you something that's way more matched up with what's happening in the adventure, and it's like that one pops more, and somebody else is doing something that may be really, really cool, but is harder to, like, make land, and sometimes you just don't have time, And it's like, if you imagine that we can just go on and do this forever, I could land all of them on a long enough timeline, probably. But, like, every time you do a campaign, somebody's work schedule changes, somebody's job changes, somebody has a kid, things happen.
Life,
and
man.
you have to truncate, and so that's one of my biggest struggles, like, is truncating and figuring out which planes to land as the whole thing, like, falls out of the sky. Yeah.
That's great. So I had another thought. I don't think we talked about this, but have you, as a player,
I don't think so. Sorry, there.
hi, Trish.
Have I as a player?
Have you, as a player, ever done what your players are doing for you to provide you with the stuff so that your DM can adapt a story for your character?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Oren, who I'm playing in the Pathfinder game, like, has that. Fox had that to some extent. Like, almost every character I do has this stuff, right?
So how do you, as a player, help your DM do that?
Yeah, okay, so how do I, as a player, help them do this? What I try to do is, like, honestly, the way I approach most of my character making for, like, people that I'm going to play is I try to create a character whose existence or whose life or whose story is asking a question that we don't know the answer to. So I have a character, Phoenix Brightgrin. He's this dwarf. He's a barbarian. He's a D&D 5e character. So he has the, like, folk hero background. So his backstory is basically that, like, he was kind of a, like, gang running, street urchin-y type character, and then he and his, like, little band of people kind of overthrew the tyrannical lord of an area, and then he went on to have a career as an adventurer, and then he retired and got married and settled down and had kids, and turned out he was way worse at that than he was at the adventuring stuff. For obviously reasons, skill set he didn't develop, right? Man. And so,
you sound like my father-in-law. Sorry.
So he basically, like, pushes his kids too hard into the adventuring life, and they kind of resent it, and some of them, end up being adventurers, and some of them don't, but it just, whatever. Eventually they kind of all grow up and are out of the house, and then his wife is like, hey, dude, you suck, you need to leave. I stayed with you for the kids or whatever, but, like, you gotta get out of here. And then his oldest son kind of kicks his ass on the front lawn, and he waltzes away in defeat. This is the backstory of this character, right?
So all of this is what you decided has happened before you ever introduce your character.
Yeah, so when we meet Phoenix, he's basically, like, in this mercenary company because it's the only kind of job he can really get, and he's basically drinking himself to death because he's hit rock bottom and he's just waiting to die, right?
He's Max Payne.
Yeah, and the question the kernel of how Phoenix came to be was, I wanted a character that, like, what could you do something different with barbarian rage? Almost everybody does the, like, barbarian rage, and that makes sense. That's the flavor of the character. My thought for Phoenix was, like, what if I had a dude whose rage was actually self-destruction, right? That he, like, it wasn't that he flies into, like, he just, like, he rushes into the most dangerous parts of battle because he doesn't want to live. Right? He doesn't want to survive the battle. But the problem
is
that
not berserker rage.
Yeah. But the problem is that
ideation.
He is a grizzled old dwarf warrior. So really what his rage kind of is this self-destructive impulse. And it's like he swings too hard and he leaves himself too open. But the thing that kind of happens is that, like, the people he's fighting are like, no, this is a tricky old dwarf. He's too savvy for that. And they don't like capitalize on all the openings, and he somehow manages to kind of survive. And the question that we're asking with Fenix is like, can he learn how to care about something else more than he hates himself? And if the answer to that question is yes, then he's going to kind of like clean up and get his act together and try to be like a, you know, productive member of a party. If the answer is no, he's just going to continue to spiral down until eventually he runs into a battle that he can't make his way out of, right? And so that's what I try to do. So like I'll be explicit with my GM. Hey, this character is asking a question. Can he find something to love more than he hates himself? Or, you know, Fox was kind of asking the question of like, can he continue to trust his friends more than he like, or is he gonna get into trouble that's so deep that he has to go with this devilish deal to get out of it, basically, right? And so oftentimes I'll even build that stuff into the mechanics of the game itself if I can. For instance, like oftentimes multi-classing a character if they go one path versus the other and things like that. So those are kind of tools that I use, is often to put a question at the core of the character, and a question that it's like I hope is easy for the DM to take and find ways to nudge my character with. You know what I mean?
Right, because that's what the question feels like to me, is you're giving the DM decision power.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's like ways that it's ways they know they can, like, again, nudge my character in one way or another, or put something in front of my character that they know is going to, like,
relate or resonate,
trigger
right? Like,
this,
right?
This question to be relevant or whatever. Yeah. Another thing that I think does bear pointing out with all of this is that the kinds of world building skills, like there's a thing that that a lot of people talk about, I've talked about it too, where like the skills that you use to world build slowly before the game starts, right, are kind of the same skills you will need to execute quickly when your players throw some crap at you that you weren't expecting, right? It's that, like,
which they always do.
They always do. But like the same creative skills that you've built in order to make stuff, for your players to play in, right? Especially if you're homebrewing stuff. Those same skills that you use to make creative decisions about what is in the world and what the adventure is going to be and all that kind of stuff are the same skills that you'll use, when your players kind of throw you a curveball. That is also true in that the same creative skills that you build in world building and making story and making characters and things like that are the same skills I use when I'm doing this kind of like monkeying stuff. And it's also the same skills I will need if my monkeying with things screws anything up that I didn't anticipate and I have to fix it later. So that is part of what I do that I think is important, is like just giving, like, because like you can imagine, okay, I'm a new GM, I've bought this adventure, there's so much in it. If you're running Curse of Strahd, maybe you've run Phandelver before, and now you're taking on Curse of Strahd. It's your next big adventure, right? And this is like several hundred pages of content. You cannot keep it all in your head at the same time. A new GM might really worry, like, God, do I have to memorize everything in this book? Like, if I change something, am I going to break something else later? All of that kind of stuff. And what I would say is, like, the way I was able to build the confidence to begin to change major things about adventures was kind of understanding, like, and I have run homebrew stuff before, was kind of understanding that the same skills I was using to, like, be creative, in advance were going to be the same skills I was going to need if I realized down the line that I screwed with something. It's like, well, I'll just pull the same tools out of my tool belt to kind of, like, fix how that's going to go, that I did in the beginning when I changed it and accidentally broke it. It's like I can unbreak it with the same tools that I broke it, even if what it looks like fixed isn't the same thing it would look like before I broke it, if that makes sense. So it's like you might change something in adventure, realize, ooh, that kind of doesn't work. Oh, man, like, what am I going to do? And you can't put it back to what it was before, but you might be able to nudge it into something else that, again, still kind of fits the shape of what needs to be there, but maybe looks different from what was originally there because some of the hooks that it has to hook into were things that you changed that you didn't realize wouldn't hook up right earlier on, right?
Right. So you're taking that same premeditation of adapting or reskinning those jigsaw pieces,
Yeah,
right? And then saying, "Oh man, actually, the color that I turned this jigsaw piece to doesn't blend well with the next one.
sure.
I kind of need, this one's red, that one's blue. I kind of need to paint a strip of purple leading into it to make it
Sure.
make sense."
Or going back to like almost it's like the player handed me this jigsaw piece and I cut something new or I cut part of the adventure or did something to hook to that jigsaw piece and then realized that the subsequent jigsaw piece maybe doesn't hook to other stuff quite the way it needs to and that I have to do some additional reshaping around the way that other stuff in that adventure hooks to that second jigsaw piece, and it's the same skill that I used to retool what was in the first place to hook to the character is going to be the same stuff I have to use to rehook the thing I broke back to anything else.
Right. It's you're sort of world building continuously throughout the campaign.
Yeah, it is.
In a way.
Yes. I mean, I've heard DMing being described as like slamming the railroad tracks down in front of the car as it's going.
Yeah.
And I think that image is apt. I also think that it's like I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's just a continuous process. I'm always kind of looking at like what are the characters doing, what arcs are they looking for, what stuff has been set up properly, what stuff needs to be set up. And like part of it is that I often like I don't plan things out in advance with characters a ton. Sometimes I do. There's little things I've done. Mostly where I like bring a character in to collude with me on something that we're kind of getting over on the other players a little bit. But I am also continuing to have conversations with the characters that are pretty frank and open about like, what
the adaptations,
the
right?
adaptations, right? So, and I feel like there's, some people I think would respond to that and say like, but then where's like the magic of the story that like you don't know this is gonna happen and that's gonna and it's like to me what I would say is when you go into a bookstore and you get a book and you look at the book and you read the blurb, right? The blurb kind of tells you what's in the book, but you still read the book because the details of how it all unfolds is the part that is so like if you buy a romance or a book that features a romance, there's going to be romance in there, right? You might even know which characters are going to be doing the romancing, right? But the details of exactly how that happens and exactly like who says what to when and why and what are the complications that arise, those are not all divulged in just the knowledge of this is the thing that's happening, right?
Right.
And so that's part of what I feel like is the same with tabletop games and the improvisational nature of it is like, yeah, we're playing Curse of Strahd. Yes, my characters have these arcs that they're shooting for, but the details of how that all unfolds is not only stuff that we don't know and don't decide in advance, but is also unpredictable because of the dice and stuff, and so, and then also the role playing that happens and all of that. So it's like that, and so I think that's something that I would encourage for anybody who's feeling like, oh, I don't want to ruin the magic by like talking to the players about the storytelling we're going to be doing is, again, you still watch movies that you kind of know what they're about. You still kind of like, it's very rare for somebody to go in fully blind. I have no idea what this media is, the story is going to be about. Sometimes you do that, but usually you have some kind of an inkling of at least what genres be happening. And so I would say extend the same grace to your tabletop gaming and don't just assume that like random is more authentic. Like we're telling stories. So if you can do something that makes the story good without ruining the experience of telling it, feel free to do it, kind of. You know what I mean? Like,
and I'd like to point out that I think one thing you do really, really well, because I've been a player in some of your past campaigns where you've done this, is to Waterdeep specifically is to give all of the players opportunities to tell their character's story to the other players.
yes, right.
And I think that that's been so satisfying for me, and I
Yeah.
know it's been satisfying for a lot of your other players.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's also something that I will deploy as like I straight up tell people that in session 0 every time I do a session 0. I'm like, all right, everyone, like, look at me, look at my face. This is important. Yes, you should be thinking about your character in terms of like, what are all the cool things I want to do with my character? Of course, you should be thinking about that. You're excited to play this character. You want these cool moments to happen. You want to use your cool abilities. You want to tell your cool backstory. All of this stuff, right? Do not only do that, right? What you should also be doing is taking some time to look around at the other characters and the other players at your table and say, how can I set them up to do their cool stuff too? Right?
okay.
And like sometimes I as the GM have to do that with NPCs, right? But it is also something that like explicitly works really well when players do it for each other. So like if you're a player and you notice that somebody else has like made a promise, dropped a little breadcrumb of something, right? Your character can go ask that person, "Hey man, what's that about?" Right? What happened there, right? And it does a couple of things. One, it makes it like it becomes less of like a stage play where everyone's trying to like muscle their way to the front of the stage and deliver their soliloquy, and it turns
Right.
it into your characters are like speaking naturally to each other, so it feels less you know discontiguous to deploy the cool backstory stuff because someone else diegetically in the world is asking you about it. But it also gives you opportunities to like deepen or flavor the relationships between these characters, right? Do they behave differently after they learn whatever it is they learn? It's just like it's to me one of the most important things that I think often goes unlooked most of the time because people like are just so focused on what is their character doing, which again is totally understandable. Everyone's excited to play their character, but looking
Or
for
like,
ways to
what is the story that the GM is telling, rather
sure, yeah,
than what is the story I'm telling, or that my
or yeah,
fellow
right.
players are
And it
telling?
is
Right.
it is that thing that like once you've been a GM, I think sometimes these things start to come a little more naturally. But instead of looking what is the story I'm telling with my character, it's like what is the story that we're telling as a group. And then where how again just like how can I set the other people up, you know, um, for landing the stuff they want to land, right? And even to the point of like I've had campaigns where players have like talked to each other outside of campaigns, outside of games, saying like, "Hey, I think I want to do a scene where my character approaches you about X, Y, or Z, or where we do X, Y, or Z together, or this or that," um, as an opportunity to give you a chance to deploy your backstory stuff, like And I
Do
think all of
you?
that. Go ahead.
Because I know that you, when you GM, you
Mhm.
take that time to sort of one on one with each player, be like, let's make sure that we're getting your upcoming like character beats.
Yeah.
Like I want to know what you want to have happen next. In what kinds of ways so that I can work it in. Do you ever do matchmaking between two players to say like, I think you should talk to so and so
Mm.
because your stories will help tell each other?
Yeah, I don't know that it's never happened. A lot of time what I'll do is during session 0 tell like so for instance the new Dragon Heist campaign that I'm about to run, I told all of the players like you are in a relatively newly established little adventuring party, but before you guys became an adventuring party, each one of you kind of had like one interaction with one of the other ones,
Mm.
and you couldn't pick the person who picked you. So that there was like this little chain of like, okay,
Oh, interesting.
this
Okay.
character met this character, and this met that, and so it gave them just this little extra bit of like backstory with each other, and they kind of started to already understand how their characters relate to each other a little bit before we've even started play. So I'll do things like that, and it's like just straight up tell them you have to pick another party member to have like at least met one time before we end up in the. And it depends on the adventure. Sometimes it lends itself to that, sometimes it doesn't. But I will do things like that where it's like I'm trying to get them to like you know I'm trying to skip past that awkward moment where everybody sits down at the table for the first time and they don't know how any of their characters, like, you know, they don't have any prior basis.
They're like
right?
sniffing each other out for the
Yes.
first time, and it's weird,
It's weird and it's awkward,
there's like
and everyone's
posturing.
afraid to take a real swing at something, you know. And so I'm trying to get around that by giving them, like, you have one way to relate to one other person in this party, and one other person in this party has some way to relate to you, typically, because it's like, right, you pick somebody, and then eventually somebody picks you, right?
Right.
And so
Round
it's like you
robin,
have
yeah.
these kind of two ties, you know, to different people. Yeah.
That's interesting. You know, I always try to tell people to develop a relationship with an NPC
Mm-hmm.
ahead of time.
Sure.
Just because, you know, it gives me a way to pull them into the world with their characters.
Yeah.
And the way that I run games, a lot of times, there's not a great easy way for me to tell other people that they know that their characters know each other, because I do it just sort of by whoever shows up to my sessions.
Right.
Well,
and I think that's one of the things about how I'm running a lot of pre-published stuff of various lengths, right? Like Fandelver is pretty short. Curse of Strahd was long as hell. You know, Dragon Heist that I'm now running for the second time is like a medium-length adventure. If we hadn't got cut off, we probably would have ended somewhere to 20 to 30 sessions, and I expect the one we're doing now will be about the same, probably. So, you know.
Well, have you ever... So I've done a thing where I've taken a pre-published one-shot adventure, basically an encounter scenario, and I've inserted it into a campaign.
Yes.
And I've also taken published one-shots and adapted those.
Yeah.
Just to be one-shots. You know, what's your strategy for doing something like that, where you have a longer campaign, homebrew or not,
right,
and you're taking another thing that's published and fitting it into that?
Yeah, so I've done that both ways. I've taken, like, I took, like, when I ran Curse of Strahd, all of the stuff that happened with the Dream Pies, right? That stuff is in the adventure, but then I took the whole windmill and the actual situation of what was going on there and drastically altered it with some homebrew bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if everybody remembers that part.
Do you remember what episode that was? So we can tell people to go
God,
watch. I think it was like 7
episode. No, it's later. I want to say it's between 8 and 12, maybe. It's like maybe up to 16. I don't know. I have to go back and look. But it's after the Death House, which is, I think, episode 6 is the end of the Death House, and then, you know, Granny Patsy shows up at the end of episode 6 or in episode 7, and then they get to the place they're going 2 or 3 episodes later with the next village of... It's not Kretsk. Vallaki? Vallaki. They get to Vallaki. And then I think the next thing they do after Vallaki is go to the windmill, but they might go to the winery before they go to the windmill. I can't fully remember. But
all right, internet sleuths.
Yeah, right.
You've been given your clues. Go figure it out.
Somebody. But yeah, so yeah, I took all of that and, you know, reworked that heavily. So I taken homebrew and slammed it into a published adventure, which is kind of what we're talking about a little bit. But I have done the other thing. I ran a several years long campaign that this channel is slightly named after, Ages of Valinor. I ran this campaign where I had a very straightforward, almost Final Fantasy I style kind of overarching plot, which was there's an evil wizard and he needs these 4 powerful MacGuffins to cast this ultimate spell of badness. So you have to get to the MacGuffins before he does. But I would take kind of the Colville method of, like, taking some pre-published content and putting it into the world. So I used the first thing that they did in that world was it's the MCDM little tiny starter adventure thing.
Oh, was it not Siege of Castle?
No.
The Tomb of the Delian Order.
So that was the first thing they did, and then the next thing they did was a short adventure written by a dude that I only know from, like, being in a band a million years ago by the name of James Bianca.
The Sphere of Sunlight.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was put in as, like, the second little adventure they did. The third adventure they did was the 5th edition, like, rework somebody had made of Against the Cult of the Reptile God. I think.
Right.
And then I let them get to the main capital city, and then they were headed to the Earth Orb was the first one they were after. And what I did, I took something from Tales from the Yawning Portal, which has several like big dungeons in it, and there was a dungeon called the Forge of Fury or something like that, which was supposed to be in this mountain, right? Like there's wilderness, there's forest, and then there's this big mountain, and the dungeon is in the mountain. I took that mountain and stuck it in the Underdark. And slapped that in there, and instead of whatever's at the bottom of it, I put a black dragon in there. Might have been a black dragon that was supposed to be down there, but I think I changed it from a young to an adult dragon. Anyway, whatever. Put a dragon in there. I did that, and then I started to do more
You put
homebrew.
a dragon in a dungeon?
I know. I did the thing. Yeah. I think there's a dragon in
God.
there to begin with, but I think I took it from a young dragon to an adult dragon because of the level my players were at. And then I started to do a little bit more like homebrew dungeon building stuff. I started not to do so much of the like pre-written adventures for that campaign and started to homebrew more of my own stuff at that point. But yeah, I definitely have experience, and it's kind of like, in some ways, it's almost easier. Like once you figure out the setup of what has to change about it to fit it into your campaign, world, or setting or whatever, right? Once you get into the adventure, it kind of it's like loading a new map in a video game. You need the entrance and the exit from it, but inside that map, it's kind of a self-contained thing. And that's kind of what it's like running these. I mean, you could dig through the whole thing and see if there's any pieces that need to attach to anything else in your adventure, but you also don't necessarily have to. You can kind of just run the thing. And, in my case, it was just, I took the MacGuffin they needed and put it in the Dragon's Treasure Hoard, and that was it, right?
Nice. Yeah. So I think the one time I did that, you were a player. I took the Impregnable Fortress of Dib.
Yes.
Wonderful encounter by Cobalt Press,
good.
I think.
So good.
And I inserted it into my campaign, The Way Forward, that I was streaming on AOA.
Yeah.
And it fit really well. I didn't have to do a ton. I tweaked it a little bit just to make it like to put the little Beast Wilds things in there so that it felt like it was just part of my world. But it was super easy to take and literally just plug in as one session. And selfishly, it was just because I had a really busy week or two leading up to that, and I didn't have enough time to prep.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh,
I feel it. Okay,
yeah.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered it. We've been talking about how to build Worldbuild or world you didn't build. Again, level 1 is kind of like reskinning or changing the paint job or something, just flipping aesthetics around a little bit. Level 2 is like finding the hooks that your players and characters give you and tying those two things in the adventure to make them feel more, connected. It sometimes means like light structural changes, but like not too major. Moving on from there is where you're starting to think about bigger changes like reworking factions or, stuff like that. But again, throughout all of this, building the skills of the world building and the creativity and the storytelling will help you have the confidence to change these things, knowing that if you realize later down the line that one of these changes isn't working as well as you'd hoped, or maybe breaks the adventure a little bit somehow, that those are the skills that you will need to fix that problem, hopefully with your players being none the wiser for it. So,
and sometimes even including them in the lie.
Yeah, right. And that is another thing. We're kind of wrapping up here, but that's the thing I've done on a couple of occasions. I did that with you in Dragon Heist. I did that with Nick, with Oz in Curse of Strahd. Is just like, that one is... they were in the situation the players were maybe all going to die. There was technically a way they could have succeeded, but it would have required a very specific roll to happen where the monster failed a what's the word I'm looking for? Failed an attack of opportunity against one of the players who didn't disengage because he needed the actions to dash later. La da 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 da. So,
Right.
I was like, we could play this out in the D&D mechanics, and that would be dramatic and interesting. But I was like, maybe we can do, like, maybe we can scheme a little bit. So I went to the character, and I basically said, like, hey, do you want to do some shenanigans with me? And, you know, he, of course, said yes, and I explained, we're going to kill your character, right? If you agree to this, you don't have to agree. But if you, like, we're going to kill your character, like, by fiat, in a cool scene that happens, but in exchange, all of your friends get to live, right? And
Bargaining,
you know,
okay,
yeah.
All right, throw some incentives in there.
And it wasn't like I basically thought it was like, you know, we could do this, and there's a chance you all survive, right? It just depends on the dice, or like we can set up this really cool scene that gives us this hook for this adventure. This thing's gonna happen that's gonna impact everybody in a huge way. We do this cool dramatic death scene. And we guarantee that everyone else lives, right? And he, of course, was super into it because it was kind of like in the same way that when you're as a GM thinking like, ooh, like it's going to be really fun when this or that happens. You kind of can bring a player into that sometimes, and it's like a bit of a trick almost you're playing on all the other players. Not in like a mean way, but in a storytelling way of like, I was in on crafting this dramatic and fun moment that happened. You know, so like I don't get the surprise of what happens, but I get to be the part of making the surprise happen. You know what I mean? So like, it's a bit of a trade-off. It's something you don't want to use too much, but it is also something that can be very effective.
Potent, yeah.
Yeah, it is potent. Yeah, when you find opportunities to do it, I highly recommend giving it a try.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for divulging so many of your
Like
thoughts
gnarly
and
little
secrets. Yeah. Your tools and your methods. I hope people get a lot out of it.
Yeah, hopefully. So we'll be putting this up on the YouTube page, gang, if you haven't seen it before. We'll be doing another one of these this month, I'm sure. I think our next plan is to talk about... we don't have that. No. What we have another plan to do a practical world building stream where we actually do some world building, which may or may not fully replace the episode this month. I don't know. But the idea for that is to take some of the stuff we've talked about in the past and sort of
actually show you guys.
Do it on stream.
Practice.
Like, live, like put in practice of like, okay, we're going to build a world. We're going to take one of these techniques that we talked about and show you really how you would do it if you were, you know, building something from scratch. So that should be a lot of fun. We may do an additional episode this month of like an actual tip thing. We may just let it be that. TBD on that, gang. But, yeah. Thank you guys for watching.
Thanks for hanging out.
If you happen to have ideas for like this stream that ideas you want us to talk about or anything like that, you can message us those. Don't put it in the YouTube comments because I almost never check those. You're better off putting those in Discord or somewhere else. So, all right, thanks, gang. Peace, and we'll catch you later.
Let me tell a tale of a world where heroes walk among us, fighting through the darkness left by monsters and by selfish men. A tale of glory rents asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. Let me sing a song of a family forged by trials and woe. On their own they falter, but together they will write their own tale of glory rent asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what so